students here at Northeastern, and I'll be helping with the moderation today, or moderating the debate today with Alice from Northeastern College Democrats. And today we wanted to welcome you all for this discussion on this very, very important question that progressives are facing today, which is who do we support for the general elections?
While the overarching question here is a normative one, which is who should progressive support, the topic of this sub-debate is a utility one based off of means. Meaning, what candidate should we vote for in order to best combat Trumpism or to stop Trump? And I apologize if this argument is about to sound predictable, but it's largely predictable because it's true. I'm going to mainline a contention focusing on electability, being that Hillary Clinton is the more electable candidate and the more effective means to the end of defeating Trump. Back in 2000, I'm sure we've all heard the story of Ralph Nader. The best the Greens could hope for in 2000 was being a spoiler for the election of Al Gore, which led to, a lot of bad shit, a lot of problems in the Middle East, a lot of rejection of any sort of progressive ideology, of any sort of progressive foreign policy, of anything along those lines. And we see the same sort of thing reflected in the election today, whereas with Jill Stein existing within the margin of error for votes in the majority of states, the best she can possibly hope to be is a spoiler for Hillary Clinton's projected victory. At this time, we're looking at a probable Hillary win with her leading probably 10 to 11 points in national polls, whereas Jill Stein is under 3 points in most states, let alone swing states. So if us as progressives move to support Jill Stein, the best that is going to do is subtract votes from Hillary Clinton and cost her the election, leading to an election of Donald Trump. Again, that may have sounded familiar, that may have sounded predictable, but probably the reason you're hearing it so often is because there's a lot of truth to it. And I'm going to also continue the argument that a Trump presidency outweighs any harms that their side can provide for a Hillary presidency. A Trump presidency will normalize violence against women, it will normalize violence against minorities, it will cause an economic downturn that will cause economic violence against poor people. It will basically be a disaster in every regard. And I'm sure that they've got a lot of Hillary problems prepped, which are valid, but I'm going to go ahead and venture out on a claim that I'm sure most people should believe, that a Hillary Clinton presidency will be better than a Donald Trump presidency. While her foreign policy may be questionable in a lot of degrees, a Trump presidency will lead to, again, the normalization of violence against disparaged and minority people on the home front, which is something that we cannot afford, especially considering the tense situation of race and whatever relations on the home front. Thanks.
So every election year, we're told by establishment candidates on both sides of the aisle that this isn't the year for a third-party vote. It wasn't the year for a third-party vote after Reagan or Nixon. It wasn't the year for a third-party vote after Bush Jr. or Bush Sr. And now we're facing a situation which is the most unpopular presidential election in U.S. history, and it's still somehow not the year for a third-party vote. So it's precisely this logic that's handed down from above that we should vote for the lesser of two evils that has really gotten us in the position that we're in now. So there's this very simple logic that a lot of people hold, and that's very understandable, but has proven to be incorrect. And that is that voting for the lesser evil is an effective way to prevent the greater evil from making gains. But if that's true, then why did we go from Bush to Palin to Trump? And why are we now faced with the most unpopular presidential race in U.S. history? Why has the greater evil steadily gotten worse? So bad, in fact, that now we're fighting this racist, bigot, billionaire that is Donald Trump. So the question then becomes, what does it take to defeat Trump, and what does it take to defeat Trumpism? In the primary race, Bernie Sanders was faring way better than Hillary Clinton against Trump, and he was actually able to provide an answer for working class people, even Trump supporters. He was able to get at the base of support for Trump. There's this really intense bitterness in society right now over the massive gap between the rich and the poor and a steady decline in our living standards, and people are looking for a legitimate challenge to that political status quo. So wherever the left fails to organize a fighting working class challenge to corporate politics as usual, we see anti-establishment figures like Trump making huge gains. And so in order for us to effectively fight Trump's popularity and the popularity of his reactionary ideas, we need to support the strongest left alternative, which is Jill Stein and the Green Party in this election cycle. It's the role of progressives to intervene in this election to make the strongest case for an authentic left challenge to Donald Trump. And now, since Hillary Clinton, as you said yourself, has a 93% chance of winning according to the New York Times, why then can we not vote at least for Jill Stein in states like Massachusetts, where it's not a swing state? The primary driver of change in society has always been movements. movements is what's propelled forward every victory for working class people since the civil rights movement, the marriage equality movement, and the entire women's movement. And in order for our movements to actually strike the biggest and most effective blow against the establishment, we need to have our own political expression of these ideas.
5 over. Done.
They've done nothing to say that the Jill Stein vote would okay, sorry, I'm a little shaky today. Let me start again. So the fact that the best hope that they have for progressives to support Jill Stein is that their votes don't count in swing states speaks a lot about the credibility of Jill Stein as a candidate. If the best that we as progressives can do is vote for a candidate in the hopes that they do not get elected so that we don't elect the worst candidate we've seen in decades is the best that they have going for them, then I think it speaks for itself why we should be supporting Hillary. The more effective way for progressives to push the platform left is to engage civically in the same way that Bernie did. We've already seen the platform pushed to the left by the reintroduction of socialism into the mainstream of democratic politics. This is something that we can continue to push without protest voting against a candidate, while at the same time endangering the election of someone that I again would say would normalize violence against many disparaged people around the country. And also in their speech, they've done nothing to touch on the issue of of my earlier statements, basically arguing that if we vote for Stein en masse as progressives, there is a chance that Stein will win 2 or 3 states, which is enough. Even though the projection for Hillary to win is pretty large, that is enough to give us a reasonable doubt of her costing us an election. And any Trump victory, any possibility of a Trump victory, outweighs any harms of a Hillary presidency that they can possibly point. I've already mentioned why this is true. If they're hoping that their candidate will not win, again, I think it's pretty important for us to realize that we may have the luxury of voting for Stein as a protest vote, as something along those lines. There are a lot of people in this country that do not have that luxury, okay? This is true. The best chance that we have of stopping Trump, and they didn't mention a lot of this in their constructive speech, is that we have to elect the candidate that's currently projected to win the election. This happened in 2000, we've talked about that earlier, and that cost the presidency of Al Gore, which led to what they were talking about, worse and worse evils. But to touch on that point of why has evil been getting worse, I'd like to say that that's not so much an American issue as it is a global issue. We've seen a shift to the right in a lot of countries in the face of globalization in Europe with people like Erdogan and Orban, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it would be a mistake to reduce this greater and greater evil to simply an American issue. Again, they've done nothing. Basically, the gist of this is this: they've done nothing to outweigh a Trump presidency. Their whole platform is based on a protest vote ideology, which is something that many people in America cannot afford. A protest vote is not now. That's not a good idea. Even though it might be safe, it probably isn't. It's probably best to stay safe in this election. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and concede the rest of my time.
Awesome. So I appreciate your concern for women and for people of color. As the only woman on the panel, I think that I can effectively say, not to pull identity politics, but it's true, I think that the most effective way to fight for working class women is to not accept policies that have year after year relegated us to the situation we're in now with disproportionately high levels of low wages, disproportionately high student debt, massive discrimination, a slashing of our access to the healthcare that we need, the education that we need. That aside, I wanted to respond to one thing, which is the claim of Nader being the reason that Gore lost the election. Nader wasn't even able to secure his own home state of Tennessee. The reason that, Gore. Gore wasn't able to secure his own home state of Tennessee. The reason that Gore lost was because Gore was a weak candidate up against Bush. It has nothing to do with third parties getting a moderately higher vote than others. It has to do with the weakness of who we're expected to accept from the Democratic Party. So as a working class woman, I think that Trump's insistence that we should be punished if we seek an abortion is abominable. It's horrifying. And to me, the most effective and concrete way to fight those ideas is to provide a genuine alternative to those ideas. His insistence that black lives don't matter means that instead we need to end the war on drugs, we need to end the crisis of mass incarceration, which was orchestrated by the Clinton administration to begin with. We need to answer his anti-immigrant bigotry with full immigration rights, access to healthcare, housing, education. And so as someone that's currently struggling with piles of student debt, I'm sure this is familiar to a lot of people in this room, why would I vote for someone that's funded by Wells Fargo, which is the second biggest student loan lender in the country? And as someone making low wages, Why would I support someone that was so hesitant to ever come out in favor of 15? And as someone dealing with the high cost of healthcare, why would I vote for someone that's funded by Big Pharma? In a time when the rise of right-wing ideas is posing this really acute threat, the answer we put forward can't continue to be this centrist corporate politics that are giving rise to the right to begin with. People that are starting to fall to Trump's anti-establishment ideas are struggling with job loss. 5 million manufacturing jobs have left the U.S. since 2000, largely due to free trade deals put forward by the Clinton administration again. And so Trump's response to this, of course, is that it's a problem with immigrants are stealing our jobs, and we have to be able to answer that. We can't put forward Hillary's answer, which is more free trade deals that are going to further exacerbate the crisis of job loss. We have to actually put forward candidates that will fight effectively for working class people globally. And so as Bernie Sanders demonstrated really well during the primaries, the most effective way for us to cut across Trump's ideas is to combine a full-throated denunciation of his bigotry with an actual fighting anti-establishment message that can unite working class people in common struggle against Wall Street.
Cool. Thanks, Juliana.
My question really is this: the socialists' response to me was emotionally touching, because all it did to me was identify that there are deep flaws in the Democratic Party. And I don't believe that there's any denying that there's a deep corporatist. I mean, all that WikiLeaks shit, I think, shows that to be true. The question I have for the socialists really is, if we live in a country where 45%, well, what is it now, like 43, 38% of the country supports a Trump, what hope do we have for pursuing your types of policies?
There are a lot of people actually now who support Trump, who may have been Bernie supporters, and there are a lot of people, polls have shown that to be true, that people who supported Bernie Sanders eventually went to Trump when it was, revealed that the Democratic Party did everything in their power, and some things that were, I would say, illegal to prevent Bernie Sanders from being the nominee of the Democratic Party. And I think that when people disregard socialist ideas being able to reach people who are self-professed Trump supporters and all, that really seems like giving up to me. And I think that the ideas that the Socialist Party has are really applicable to people, to working people of all political stripes currently. If we were really able to reach out to them with the ideas that they have, they would understand that they're being tricked by Republicans into thinking that Republicans have the sort of plans that will support their interests.
Sorry, you first need to indicate me if you want to speak, but you can go ahead.
I am speaking. A poll from Washington Post said that 90% of the Sanders supporters plan to vote for Clinton in November.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, I think we could be a little answer than that, first of all. Secondly, I would agree largely with what Cassie said and what I think you were trying to say. I think it's significant. I actually really feel for that point that you raised, that there's such a high percentage voting for someone like Trump, which is so very different from the ideals that progressives hold and what we want to see in this country. So many people are voting for him. How can we possibly hope to have anything like socialism enacted? But I think part of that thinking partially comes from, first of all, the degree of real separation there is, but also sort of the portrayal of these political ideologies as this perfectly linear pattern, right? Where it's the right's all the way over here and the left's all the way over here. When in reality, whether or not, however many Bernie supporters are voting for Hillary, there's such a large overlap between the concerns that Trump supporters have and the concerns that people that were voting for Bernie had, and the sentiments that they hold. While, of course, there's a huge difference, and there's, also tremendously different ideologies, it's like a Venn diagram. They're sharing a lot of ground there. That's an anti-establishment sentiment that he's tapping into. That's why Trump has gained the level of power that he has, is because the people that are voting for him are right in that they're saying this bullshit has to change, right? Dramatically. Both parties are failing us as a people. And people that are supporting Trump and people that are supporting Gary Johnson feel that way. And people that supported Bernie were feeling that way. But now what we're seeing is that the right's capitalizing on this anti-establishment phenomena, and Hillary's getting the anti-establishment votes from the left. And that, to me, speaks to the value of a Jill Stein vote, right? We're saying that we're from the left, and we want serious establishment change, right? We want an anti-establishment movement to happen. And And that's not going to happen by voting for Hillary or, frankly, for really anyone that we've seen in the Democratic Party.
Thank you.
And just for everybody, since there are so many of us who clearly care about, regardless of who we're voting for, we identify as progressives, we care about things so much, regardless of however this election pans out, where do you think the Greens and Democrats can collaborate to effectively move policy forward on issues we mutually care about, at a state and a federal level?
I agree with what the speaker for Hillary said in terms of this not being just an American context. It is a global context. And what we're seeing is a global reaction to establishment politicians around the world, like Hillary Clinton. In the UK, you have the Tony Blair wing of the Labour Party that's been rejected by both the left and the right. In Greece, you had the New Democracy Party that had been rejected. You have all these establishment parties being rejected, and if a left alternative hasn't been built, then the right has won. We've seen that with the rejection of Labour in Scotland and the growth of the Scottish National Party. We've seen that in the rejection of New Democracy and there was the old Social Democratic Party. Anyway, the rejection of that and the rise of not only Syriza, but the neo-fascist Golden Dawn. Half of GOP supporters, have said in this election, egged on by Trump, that they're going to refuse to accept this result if Donald Trump loses. What does that mean? It means that Trumpism doesn't end with this election. In fact, it grows and becomes more malicious and insidious, and we could see the possible rise of a right-wing populist party that Trump can't even dream about. We've seen white nationalists, all these people that you say we should be concerned about grow out of his campaign. That's not going away if Trump loses. But what will make it go away, and it has been outlined by Bernie Sanders' presence in the race, is class politics that appeal to people on a programmatic basis, $15 an hour minimum wage, jobs, anti-racism, all of these things that speak to not only Trump supporters but also to left-wing supporters. And I would contend too, in 2000, it's not Nader didn't cost the Democrats the election, as Keeley outlined, Democrats cost the Democrats that election. Okay, just one last thing. There were more registered Republicans or registered Democrats that voted Republican in that race than voted for Ralph Nader. And the Democrats had an opportunity to challenge the illegal shit that went down in Florida, and they didn't. That's the blame for that lies with the Democratic Party.
My name's Joe. I'm a member of Socialist Students. I'm supporting Jill Stein this election. I briefly want to talk about how I think that the Stein vote shows the viability of a new party, and we're talking at a time like at the election season when political consciousness is at its greatest. So that's why us on the left need to be focusing on the left alternative during this time, because that's when people are actually going to be listening to us. Also, I agree with what Keeley was saying on the power of movements in society and how those are the true drivers of change, not the Democratic Party. A vote for Jill Stein, I think, is a vote for actually putting forth that movements are possible, putting forth anti-corporate politics, and getting away from the Democrats so we can actually start to create real change. One last thing I would say is I agree with the Hillary side that some of Trump's more racist, xenophobic supporters are violent and may continue to be violent with a Trump supporter. But to quote, your normalizing of violence on the home front, I think neglects so much of the violence that is already occurring on the home front, mainly because of the Democratic Party and mass incarceration, police brutality, and things of that nature.
The socialists. So you talked about how the election of centrist corporate candidates has given rise overall to like the Trump voter base that we've seen today, or just right-wing politics in general. But my question is, how would you combat the statistic that, in the study that just came out, I can't cite it off the top of my head, but that like the Trump constituency doesn't really consist of the people that we think they do, which is these pockets of working class people who are affected disproportionately by free trade agreements, but that the average Trump supporter makes, I think it was like $76,000 a year.
One could make the argument that the best way to reject the movement on the right of Trumpism is to have the largest amount of victory possible against Donald Trump, meaning that the more support that goes towards Hillary Clinton's campaign, the more likely we are to show the other side that we're rejecting their movement. And I mean, the speaker from the Socialist brought up like things like student debt, and isn't it, you know, just these things have already been addressed in the platform by the Democratic Party, you know, reducing student debt, the fight for 15, or just increasing the minimum wage in general, that isn't it best that we elect the candidate, or we support the candidate that is most likely to get elected so that we can push forward that ideology? Or, I mean, we just gonna...
For the College Democrats, the previous speaker, and you mentioned that you want to like push for progress by ensuring grades stick regularly, but how can you say like grades push for progress when you're didn't come out in support of equal marriage rights until like the late 2000s? Someone who hasn't been willing to push for 15, and someone who's been a part of a party that's already supported 2.5 million. I just don't see the part of a push happening there. I see more of a complacent sort of resilience to like popular demands that sort of only once massive movements happen do the Democrats respond to this kind of noise that
around the room that the best way to enact socialist or progressive policies is by protest voting for Jill Stein, or to try and create a new party or increase the viability of a third party in the United States, because I'm pretty sure that overall that's not the case. When I mentioned Bernie Sanders in my previous speech, I mainly was mentioning him in the sense that his support pushed the Democratic Party platform very far to the left, further to the left than it has been in many, many years. In the current Democratic policy platform, we see student loan refinancing, the fight for a $15 minimum wage, things that oftentimes coincide with many socialist or green policy platforms. And I think that this notion that electing Stein is the best way to see more of those progressive policies put into the Democratic mainstream platform is not the case. The best way for us to see the realization of mainstream of socialism in mainstream politics is not by voting for an unelectable candidate. It is by engaging with the currently existing establishment to push it into a more socialist, a more left stance. That's what we saw in this election with the popularity of Bernie and the shift of Hillary's platform to encapsulate those first-time Bernie voters. And we can see that happen again if the Democrats are able to retake Congress following Trump's loss or during a Hillary presidency. That is not the case. That will not happen if we vote for Jill Stein, run the risk of electing Trump, or throw our votes into this sort of marginalized party that at present has no chance of being elected. The best way for the Greens to try and realize their party in mainstream politics is either by voting Hillary and trying to engage to change the existing policy platform, or by changing the platform of the Green Party so that it's more acceptable in the mainstream and stands a chance of being elected in the future. Thank you.
If the primary question we're trying to answer in this debate is how do we fight Trump, that I think that Andy in the back said it really well, that Trump is not going to stop with this election. The problem of Trump's support base is going to continue to grow and gain incredible amounts of momentum in the next period, and the only thing that can cut across that is its opposite, is an answer to the question that people have from a left-wing perspective. We've seen for decades now that we have put up these centrist Democratic Party politicians to challenge the rise of the right wing, and no one has been able to respond to why the fact the right wing has gotten worse every election cycle. How did we wind up with Trump being our choice? How did we wind up with Hillary being our choice? It's precisely because the left hasn't been able to put forward any viable alternative candidates. A lot of people like to tout Hillary Clinton's experience to say that that somehow makes her a viable candidate. So if we're going to claim that her experience is a benefit, let's look at her experience. She sat on the board of trustees for Walmart and allowed anti-union, anti-worker, policies to be carried out internally. She supported NAFTA. She supported until it was unpopular the TPP, and she's going to continue to backtrack on these things. And then when she's elected, actually put them forward anyways. She was resistant to support 15, resistant to support marriage equality. She called young black people super predators. I mean, this is who we can expect from the Democratic Party. This is the best that the Democrats can put up. I think that it's time that we need a new party that has internal democracy, that can put forward anti-racist candidates, that can actually cut at the rise of Trump. And if we agree that that's necessary, if we agree that we need a new party, then the only concrete way to do that is to vote for the best left alternative candidate that is running in this election cycle, register the largest possible protest vote, and build the basis for a new party going forward so we don't wind up with Trump on steroids in 2020.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I felt that was a great start. I think it's clear that we're living through the craziest and most unpopular election in U.S. history, between the least liked candidate ever, Donald Trump, and the second least liked candidate ever, Hillary Clinton. Polls are showing that 55% of Americans are actually disgusted. That's the word that they're using with the election. People think it's an absolute joke, and I can't really say that I blame them. But for us and socialist students, it's actually also been an extremely valuable learning experience, and for other millions of other young people around the country. In the primary campaign, we witnessed the Democratic Party be exposed as not a party of the people, but rather a corporate party that represents the interests of big business and their chosen candidates more than those of ordinary people. In the primaries, you had Bernie Sanders, as was talked about, a candidate with 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the Democratic Party in many ways. He was, of course, running as a Democrat, but he wasn't taking any corporate cash, which is actually a hallmark characteristic of all top-level Democratic Party and Republican Party, of course, candidates. He was calling for a political revolution against the billionaire class, but vying for the leadership of one of the two main parties that is actually at the most fundamental level controlled by that very same billionaire class. Sanders got 13 million votes, calling for a program that called for breaking up the big banks, a $15 an hour minimum wage, single-payer health care, tuition-free public college, decisive action on climate change, ending mass incarceration, massive investment in rebuilding infrastructure, and taxing the super wealthy, big business, and Wall Street to pay for it all. And he raised $230 million from over 2 million individual people to fight for this program. All of this without taking a dime in corporate cash. In poll after poll, Sanders was shown to fare way better than Hillary Clinton against Trump in a general election. But if the Democratic Party's key priority is stopping Trump, like is being raised on the other side here, then why did the DNC and the Democratic Party establishment so fiercely back Hillary Clinton in the primaries? Arguments about her being more electable, they were just completely false. And I think when it comes to the learning experience of socialist students, I think the key lesson is that the Democratic Party and their leadership is more concerned, more committed actually, to maintaining their alliance with Wall Street and big business than they are to defeating Donald Trump and the right wing. And I think a party with these priorities doesn't deserve a drop of our support as young people, working class people, and progressives. What we need is a left-wing anti-establishment party, a party that bases itself off of social movements and the labor movement. And in the here and now, Jill Stein's campaign is the most concrete thing that points in this direction. The task at hand is to register the largest possible protest vote, to use as a launching pad to continue building movements into 2017, and a party of
All right, I'm
or
going to
by
talk over you now.
99%.
So in regards to the topic of whether or not we should form a party of the 99% or proceed with the current Democratic Party, it comes down to we need to look into examples of what a party of the 99% would look like. In the current situation, that looks best as the Green Party. Now, to put the Green Party in perspective for you, there are 100 seats in the American Senate, 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, 50 governorships, 1,972 upper house state levels, and 5,411 lower state level house seats. The Libertarian Party holds 4 of those. The Green Party holds 0. There is absolute disorganization on the Green Party's front and would likely be absolutely disorganized in the face of a party of the 99%. Now, I understand the critiques of the Democratic Party from a progressive perspective, specifically in regards to mass incarceration, deportations, especially the various flaws with capitalism, neoliberalism, and even liberalism itself. However, there's a much better shot in changing the Democratic Party through coalition-based reform than by simply breaking off from the Democratic Party to form a new party as a form of protest. There's a very strong argument to be made in moving away from certain democratic policies, democratic centrist tendencies. And the way the Democratic Party treated Sanders in the primary, with saying very many mean things, I will admit, it is very ridiculous to then go off of this and say, well, you know, we should just form a new party. Because the point is that the party platform has been moved into a far more left direction than it has been in the past. This is not only going to say that the policies themselves are more progressive, but this is also allowing for a much wider array of opportunities for future progressive politicians and local leaders, especially those of the current millennial generation, to move forward into the progressive and political scene in the United States. With this at the most forefront of American politics, with the Democratic Party being more left, being coalition-centric and being less dependent upon centrist tendencies of the past, the best bet the left has in order to truly promote its goals is not to embrace the logistical nightmare that would be a party of the 99%, but also to move with the Democratic Party, reform it over time, if not through grander reformations, but to seize upon this opportunity and not break off in a way that would severely risk damaging itself and opening itself to the growing, admittedly, tendencies of the right.
When talking about progressive change, I think the most important thing is to start with what do we want? What are our demands? What do we need? And then from there, discussing and debating out the tactics and strategies that would be needed to achieve these. And I think that, that's a large part what we're doing. So we start with our demands. What's our program? Things I listed off before I think are good starting points, although not everything. We need single-payer health care. We need tuition-free public college. We need a $15 an hour minimum wage. We need community control of the police and an end to mass incarceration like was being talked about. We need an end to reliance on fracking in the fossil fuel industry. Every single one of those things is part of Jill Stein's platform. Actually, not one of those things is part of Hillary Clinton's platform. So right off the bat, we shouldn't expect any of that to come from Hillary Clinton. One of these things, $15 an hour, is on the Democratic Party's platform, thanks to Bernie Sanders and the pressure from his movement. But with talks about kind of reforming the Democratic Party, reclaiming the Democratic Party, it's important to look at if that's possible, right? I think, unfortunately, there are actually no mechanisms within the Democratic Party whereby elected party officials and representatives can be held accountable to the party platform and what the party members want. So contrary, I think, to what the name might suggest, Democratic Party, it actually has nothing to do with democracy. It's extremely undemocratic. It's dominated by corporate cash. So if we accept these demands, the things that I'm talking about, 15 an hour, community control police, etc., if we accept these as things worth fighting for, which we in socialist students absolutely do, the critical question becomes, is the Democratic Party the appropriate vehicle through which to fight for these, or do we need a new tool, a new weapon, a new party to use? And I want to clarify, the Green Party, the cool thing about socialist students, we're actually not part of the Green Party. We support Jill Stein, but we want to see a broad party of the 99% that is based off of social movements, that is based in unions, that is based in workplaces, in communities, and on campuses. And it's important to state that for us, the most decisive factor to whether progressive change happens or whether regressive change doesn't happen is not who's sitting in the Oval Office. The most decisive factor that will determine whether these things happen is actually the strength and momentum of social movements. I think that needs to be stated unequivocally. This is shown by the history and proved by the history of victories spanning from the 8-hour workday to women winning the right to vote, to the civil rights movement, to the fight for 15, and certainly most recently what we saw with same-sex marriage. But also, and this is where it comes to the new party, of critical importance is, do our movements have a political expression? A way for us to take our movements and our demands into the halls of power to fight there. We need to have representatives that don't take corporate cash. That's an absolute must. We need to have representatives that are held democratically accountable. How much time does that mean?
You have 20 seconds.
Cool. Democratically accountable to our movements and not off the 1%. And the question is, can the Democratic Party offer us? I genuinely wish that it could, but I don't think that it can. And so what that means, Bernie Sanders' campaign showed that it's possible. The infrastructure is there. We just need to build it. Labor leaders, progressive leaders need to come together and build this. So if there's agreement on the need for something like this, a party where these things, where we can get
The great
these
thing
things.
about Hillary Clinton is, all right, done.
All right, you heard it here, folks, two contradicting statements. One, either I can't see the Democratic Party inducing change, or Bernie was able to actually change part of the Democratic Party's platform. That is no grand statement against huge ideologies that dominate the party, but that is definitely and unequivocally a huge change to the left for the party. So it definitely is possible. Now I want to focus on certain issues such as, I would love to focus on issues such as corporate cash, the environment, but I also like to focus on the fact that HRC's platform, while it doesn't focus on those specific issues, it does focus on a wide variety of issues that are extraordinarily important to many Americans, particularly marginalized ones, not only in terms of closing the school-to-prison pipeline, but also in terms of bolstering solar energy and making America one of the most powerful renewable energy capitals in the world. But not only does Hillary have a strength in that, but also she has a strength in that the Democratic Party is a constantly moving left mechanism. The beautiful thing, again, about Bernie Sanders moving the party to the left is that it makes it more likely for it to move more to the left into the future. It's a building process. It's not just a move left once and be done. These are dynamic parties in a never-ending spiral of American partisanship. Either we cut ourselves off from are that we cut ourselves off and form new parties, create huge split votes, as you can look to anywhere in the world virtually to see the examples of, or you use coalition politics, build to a more left party, build to new left solutions that will bring about leftist real change within the Democratic Party, even if it does take over time. Now, I cannot say whether or not it will be beneficial to form a new party in the future years, as 10 or so years down the line, everything could change. But I can guarantee you that for the years 2016 and 2020, as it stands right now, unless we have a fractured right, it will be a logistical nightmare for the left and provide a humongous window for the right if we are to sacrifice our hegemony as a party, as a mechanism that has at least has the ability, if not has the intrinsic entitlement to move to the left. It is in that note that I would like to also acknowledge the sense of party privilege that the socialist alternative has brought, and Boston Socialist Students has brought forward, because of Jill Stein having a very perfect record and having a very clean record in terms of liberal policies, staying consistent on the issues, not really, very few recounts of lying, albeit her stance on medical science is debatable. However, the thing that I want to bring up is that it's your advantage as a party when it serves to your advantage as a party when you are less electable, because you have to do less to serve larger amounts of people. That is all I would like to concede, and something I think anyone who wants to form a new party ought to consider.
That I think will be touched on. I don't think it's quite fair to equate or equivocate Party 99% and what we should work for existing and the Green Party as it exists today. To do that sort of, you're kind of ignoring the level of potential that a 99% party has. And I think it's important to note also that as long as we continue to support either of the two parties, we're just continuing to marginalize anything other than those, right? So to say that don't form a new party, look how weak the Green Party is, support the Democratic Party. It's almost self-contradictory, because the Green Party is as weak as it is, and Green Party equivalents, we'll say, are as weak as they are, because every time we actually think about talking about an alternative, there are people that take the stance of, well, we gotta stop Trump, we gotta stop Bush. Let's go with the left centrist party. The other thing I think that keeps bringing up, and a lot of the people that are voting for Hillary are bringing up, is that the shift in the Democratic Party platform that happened with Bernie, right? And I think there's a couple of sort of things that we have to keep in mind when we're considering that platform. One, we don't know how much they're actually going to do that, right? Hillary said a lot of things that she hasn't done in her history, and so have actually almost every politician that we see within the two mainstream parties, right? So there's an issue of trust there. She literally said she has to have a different public policy than a private policy, and it's proven through these leaks that that's the case, right? So we can't necessarily trust it. It's also not really good enough, right? It's not actually addressing, we have to look at the underlying causes that are creating the situation that we have in our world today. The underlying causes are that both of our parties are controlled by corporations. They represent the interests of the economic elite, not those of the people. So that's something we need to think about. We have to question whether or not the Democratic Party will ever be serious about actually addressing those things. It is a corporatist party. Why would it ever be in their interests?
All right, I'm gonna have to cut you off.
Okay.
I actually work as a registered nurse, and I deal sometimes with a lot of mental illness. And actually, one definition of mental illness is that when someone does the same thing over and over again, and the same results happen, and then they do it again, and they expect a different result. I think that's an analogy of our election system in fact, that we're told, oh, the next time it's going to be different. The next time, progressive issues will be raised. And we're having, as other people have said, we're having the opposite effect. This kind of idea that's put forward, well, the Democrats have been moved to the left by the Sanders campaign, or can be moved to some, is magical thinking, or hopeful thinking at best. You could see, if anybody watched the Democratic Party conference, convention, we saw how the Sanders supporters were treated with absolute contempt, and we saw the debates on platform were completely scuttled, and none of the big issues that Sanders actually put forward were taken up. And also, it's magical thinking, because the Democratic Party have no internal democracy. The decisions are made by Wall Street in private meetings of what the decisions are going to be. And there was no way of enacting, of forcing through any kind of platform within the Democratic Party. To believe that is the case is crazy. And I think the proof of how change happens is how it's been outlined here, that it's actual when people power get involved, when people actually mobilize, it puts pressure on the politicians.
My question is twofold. So the first is that you keep talking about how we need to engage with the it's for the college Democrats. So the first is that you keep talking about how we need to engage with the Democratic Party because change is an incremental process where we push the leftist agenda forward. Louder?
Yeah.
Sorry. You keep talking about how change is an incremental process where we keep pushing the leftist agenda forward. You talked about how, because of Sanders, the Democratic Party embedded the $15 minimum wage into their platform. But like was mentioned by the socialist students, there's no method of holding the Democratic Party accountable for doing that, which is why Hillary Clinton, upon promising single-payer health care, immediately bounced on it once she won the primary. And the second part, this part's not really a question, it's just an opinion. But you keep talking about how people who vote for Jill Stein do it because of their privilege, but I don't know. I don't think it's like a very privileged position to vote against the candidate who forced you to emigrate to the United States because the Clinton administration subsidized the paramilitary death squad that squashed their union in some country that was inimical, where free trade agreements were adverse to them, or yeah, that's it.
The only way that's going to be done is to build it. Like if you're not, if people aren't voting for the Greens, then they have to start from zero for ballot access every 4 years, and that's like a lot of money and infrastructure that's not going to be built. So actually, the only way you're going to create that is through actually not voting for the Democrats. And then the other thing about the question of like, well, will there be like more right-wing backlash or whatever if we are, as progressives, we're actually more, unapologetic and straightforward. It's like if we're doing anything right, there's going to be backlash. Like if you look at the civil rights movement, it was not just like they just went and then like all of a sudden things happened. It's like you actually saw tons of like white supremacist violence against those activists because of what they were doing, because of the impact it was having. So it's like, yes, we should be expecting like, the reason why we're seeing Trump now is actually because, All Lives Matter, that sort of backlash to Black Lives Matter started before Trump announced his candidacy. It's because since 2008, actually, there's been a lot of people who have started to organize themselves, get organized when they haven't been organized before at all, and that's why we're seeing this sort of right-wing backlash. And the way we're going to actually defeat that is to keep doing what we're doing and actually start to build our organizations. So it's like talk about labor movement at first. There were no unions, no sort of organizations, and we need to be able to set our own agenda. Because the Democratic Party is not going to do that. I think we've seen actually with this election that by design, it's like, yes, the platform is meaningless. I think probably time's close to up so we can talk like later or whatever. Thanks.
The Democratic Party should progress. I think if we're going to say that we're not talking about global leftist ideology, what we're instead talking about is how should specific political clubs in the United States behave, then we have to accept facts on the ground. We cannot imagine a world that how it should be. We have to accept the world as it is. If you look at the data, Donald Trump supporters, at least in the primary, we don't really have any data about general election votes yet, but at least in the primary, as Zach said, these are not poor people who are badly affected by globalization. These people are not susceptible to economic arguments. These arguments are against, they oppose that fundamental socialist idea of fighting racism, of fighting inequality. What we have seen in the Republican Party, I think over the past year, is that you can say whatever you want about brown people, black people, Muslims, you can say whatever you want. The only line that really exists in American politics is what you can say about women, which is great. The fact that that line now exists, and it didn't 30, 40 years ago, or maybe even more, maybe 20 years ago. Shit Bill Clinton did is really fucking horrific. But we have to accept that we live in an imperfect society, that we live in a society where people don't really care about anything other than sex stories, and they don't really care about politics, they don't really care about economics. Like 70% of people support some kind of solar panel policy, right? But if you support some kind of green energy policy. But if you have to say, all right, how about a carbon tax? They say, no, we don't want that. People in America are stupid. You can't make these arguments. You have to be practical. You have to make arguments that are contingent on broad coalitions of widely disparate people.
I don't want to accept things the way that they are.
Because if I'm gonna accept things the way that they are, then that means I'm gonna accept the fact that I'm a woman, and therefore I'm always gonna make 30 cents less than you do because you're a man. And I don't wanna accept that. I wanna envision a better world, and I'm going to fight for a better world. That's the only reason that we are all able to sit in this room looking as different as we do, because we wanted to fight for a better world. And I think that when people who support Trump look at a sign and say fight racism, I don't think that they say, no, we should have racism. They're saying, I don't have a job. And there's all these new people coming into my country, and they have jobs and I don't. So why don't I have a job? Oh, they must be taking it from me. And it's policies like Clinton's policies that have created those sorts of mentalities. The Green Party, though, it's not perfect, but the Democrat kept saying it's a logistical nightmare. That's the Democratic Party. They're the ones that flip coins to figure out who wins. They're the ones that steal ballots. They're the ones that hide emails. They're the logistical nightmare. Now, the Green Party, they're not perfect. They're a bit older than most of us, and they don't build movements. That's one of their biggest problems. But if we're going to talk about the lesser of two evils, the two right there are Hillary Clinton and Jill Stein, not Trump, because we all hate Trump. So if I'm looking at those two, I'm going to pick Jill Stein, because the 13 million people who supported Bernie Sanders because of the $15 minimum wage, end to environmental destruction, where's Clinton in Dakota? Does she have a policy against pipelines that are going to poison the Mississippi River? But the Green Party does, although they're not perfect. So if we're going to say that the Green Party's not perfect, and the Young Democrats admitted that the Democratic Party needs to be reformed, but just not now, they're both not perfect. So why don't we fight for a party to build a party, not saying that the Green Party is that party, but to build a party that fights for things that we want, like a free college education, which the Democratic Party does not fight for, an end to police brutality. No, the Democratic Party makes those policies.
Not going to be very good for most of you, but newsflash, there are more people in this country than just progressives. Now, if you want to make a new party, great, go for it. But it's not going to be electorally viable, because most of this country is not progressive. The last time that a new party split off and became a thing was 1860. Now, in the primaries, Hillary Clinton won because more people voted for her. I know some of you conspiracy theorists out there believe differently, but this is how democracy works. She got more votes, she's the nominee. And those of you that want to vote for Jill Stein, great. You're voting for someone who refuses to release more than 2 pages of her tax returns, someone who believes in magic to relieve our student loans, and call for a moratorium on GMOs that includes 92% of U.S. grown corn. Great. So you're taking your ball and going home, instead of working to change from within. Like,
That means we have 2 more minutes.
Thank you, President Bartlett. People like Bernie Sanders, who have worked to change the Democratic Party from the inside. That works. That's what works. So, conspiracy theorize all you want, but that's my question.
Or do we need a new party? I would absolutely say we need a new party for the main reasons that the Democrats, as Seamus pointed out, are a voting platform. There's no actual discussion or debate. They don't foster movements. All you do is vote. And also, they are beholden to corporate cash. They always will be. I don't care what their platform says. They're going to do what the money tells them to do. Just a few really quick statistics. There are now 20 people in the United States that have owned the same amount of wealth as half the population. We have, according to Andrew Basovich at BU, last I heard, military presence in 147 out of 161 countries. Imperialism in the Middle East is rampant. There's an economic control order in Puerto Rico passed by the Democrats. These are all things because of companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and the Pentagon that have contracts with them. The Democrats are not reformable. The Democrats are beholden to corporate cash, and we need a new party.
I thought that was another really great discussion and really important. I think the first thing I want to address is Nathan said that, talking about how Stein has a perfect record because she's never been in office. I think implying that elected office is this like automatically corrupting machine or something like that. But I just don't really think that's possible. I think that's a low standard to hold us to. I want to talk about the example of Shama Sawant in Seattle. She's a socialist city councilor in Seattle. First open socialist to be elected to a U.S. city position 40 years. Got elected without a dime in corporate cash. Her re-election campaign was actually the most expensive city council race in U.S. history. Raised, I believe, about $500,000, almost half $500,000 I think, again, showing what Bernie Sanders showed, that on a local level, it is possible to build these things. People are looking for this. And I think, you know, to use the idea that, like, oh, well, there hasn't been ever a progressive party in this country, so, like, why would it happen now? I mean, that's just the age-old, I mean, it's really actually a conservative argument. I mean, what happens if people, I mean, not even what happens if, people were telling those marching in the civil rights movement, those marching when women got the right to vote, oh, it's never happened, there's never been integration, black people have always lived separately, right? What if they were like, oh shit, you're right, I guess I'll just sit down, right? Absolutely not. They kept fighting for what's right, and that's what I tried to point out, is that the first thing that we in socialist students look at is what do we need? And then the second thing is how do we get there? What's the path, was it 20 seconds left? What is the path of least resistance? I think that reforming the Democratic Party, to say that Sanders is doing this and it's worked, it hasn't worked. We still have Hillary Clinton. How much longer are we going to accept these candidates that they're shoving down our throats that are going to be ineffective in fighting the right wing? And I think, you know, every 4 years in American society, the elections are the most politicizing thing to happen, every 4 years. And for those who see the need for a new party, even if you think that, you know, it needs to happen down the road or something, we have to use this opportunity with this audience in order to
Hillary
get...
Clinton applied to NASA when she was younger.
Extra five.
No, that
What we
was
need
5
is a new
seconds
party
over.
of, for, and by
Hillary
the 99%.
Clinton did a lot of voting.
Alright. There's a lot of things I could start on here. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that Sanders is not an isolated incident, that, again, by inducing more left change into the Democratic Party, not only has he made incremental reforms to the left from Democrats, he has made it more possible for the Democrats to become more left in the future. For example, take the, you mentioned Kshama Sawant, I bring you Zephyr Teachout, a person running for Congress in New York's 19th District, a Democrat, who is openly identifies as a Sanders-type progressive, and has been endorsed recently by Barack Obama, a person who is statistically more to the center than Hillary Clinton. This is one example of the kind of left shift that is too common in the Democratic Party. If coalition politics is to succeed, it will create an environment where the left is looked upon more favorably by the center, and not as much in a hostile way. So, on that note, I would also like to say that despite that when it comes to the concept of protesters and their movements over time being told, oh no, you won't be able to ever achieve this, they achieved that, but they achieved that through a combination of what I believe is absolutely essential in politics, and that is a combination of ideological means and pragmatic means. So far, there's been zero presentation of pragmatic means on behalf of the socialist argument here. So you have to line into what comes as pragmatic as well, which is in this case only the Democrats. Now, so pragmatism and idealism both need to very much exist in order for this change to exist, in order for the protesters' voices to be heard. If not, the legislative action does not happen. If not, there is no local organizing, which even in this apparently corporate-controlled Democratic Party, I'm sure that the Greens could at least score a lower house seat, which they have been unable to do entirely. So I would say that pragmatism is completely lacking in these arguments from the far left, and that if you are to proceed with the far left, which as a socialist myself, I fully agree that we need to move in the direction of, you may think I'm not a socialist, but
5
if
seconds
you hear me
over.
out.
Did you know that Jill's son is in a band? Okay.